minutes and stop is working out really well. Thank you both so much. So let me just say, I'm really excited to continue moving our program forward, and both Andrew and Heidi, thanks a lot for that point about, really articulating the return on investment, because so often those get lost as a part of the conversation around the business. So I did want to point out, because we're really fortunate today, we have Mark Jones, who is a manager of accessibility and services for guests with disabilities at Walt Disney World. Just on a personal note, I don't know Mark, I don't know if you know Marie Trotter.
I know the name, sure.
So with TSA, amazing. The two of you should probably jointly do a panel discussion, because I think there's a lot of similarity in the work that you do. I've met her today. If anyone here does not know who she is, please Google her. She's an amazing lady, and a lot of the things that you're probably going to hear today are also conversations that take place in her world. So I'll turn it over to Jake and Mark.
Okay. So it's
Don't need it.
there you go. You don't need that.
We'll put that right here on the ground.
Yeah. So we're here with Mark Jones. And
Good morning, everybody. Hi. How are we doing?
we're honored to have you, Mark.
Thank you.
So Mark
Thank you
is
very
in
much.
charge of accessibility and guest services for Walt Disney Resorts, and so he has a lot of insights. And let's start with your backstory.
Oh gosh. So what do we have? 3 hours? No. As advertised, the presentation today focuses on sort of more of my personal story. So I think Jake mentioned it earlier. Everybody seen the film CODA? Everybody knows what that is? Does everybody know what CODA stands for? It's an acronym, actually. It stands for Child of Deaf Adults. So that's me. I am the child of parents who are deaf. I'm actually what's also known as a SODA, another acronym, sibling of a deaf adult. My brother, my only sibling, is deaf. So much like the film, the main character in the film, her entire immediate family was deaf. That was kind of me. They didn't own a fishing boat, by the way, and I didn't live in Massachusetts, but I lived in Connecticut, Hartford, Connecticut. And my backstory, Jake, is I grew up in what I thought was just a normal household. Yes, there were things my parents asked me to do that maybe you might think were strange, but at the time they didn't seem strange to me. As time passed and I grew up and sort of understood the way it was for people elsewhere, I realized, oh yeah, my upbringing was a little bit different. So I obviously communicated at home using sign language. That's what my parents used. I also answered the phone and answered the door and went with my parents to help them communicate when needed in sign language. My parents, super self-sufficient. By the way, my little slide here is just a montage of sort of my life with my family and my job at Disney, but there's no particular reason for any of these pictures other than just to give you a glimpse of that. But that was kind of what my upbringing was, Jake, was just kind of being there to support my parents. Chapter 7 of my book will contain all of these crazy stories that now are comical, but at the time I didn't think anything of it. Going with my mom to some of her doctor's appointments, going with my dad to negotiate the purchase of cars, just things like that. My brother and I playing pranks on my mom, things like unplugging the vacuum cleaner and waiting to see how long it was before she figured out we unplugged it. Things like that. My brother's deaf too, by the way, so he's the instigator because he's older than me.
So growing up as a CODA, okay, so did you take vacations?
We did, yeah.
So what were the major hurdles, and what was, you were the tour guide, basically,
Correct,
right?
yeah.
So, and then what sort of kind of indignities did your parents face?
So the great thing about Connecticut, very progressive state, some pretty good services that existed in Connecticut, but this all still predated the ADA. So there were things the state did because they felt like they kind of should, but not necessarily things that, meet what you might see today. So challenges galore for my parents, just communicating. When we'd go on vacation, my mom didn't drive, so my dad was always the driver. And we took very standard vacations. My grandparents lived in Tarpon Springs, which is about an hour from here, near Clearwater, Florida. So Florida was actually a big destination for us on vacations. Walt Disney World was a big place that we went on vacation as well. But it was always just, as the hearing person at restaurants and places and communicating and signing with my parents at the table, it was fascinating, even at an early age, the number of people around us who just they were just amazed that there were these deaf people that were able to sit down and eat at a restaurant and do stuff, and just hearing them have those conversations. Most of them were more curiosity-based, but every now and then you'd get a hold of a conversation, a corner of my ear, that really kind of shocked me, and then the server would come to the table and I would begin to speak, and you could just see out in the out around the tables we were at, all the people were like the realization, oh my gosh, there's somebody at that table that can actually hear us. So anyway, challenges, but all taken with a grain of salt.
So you were like the parent to your parents in a lot of ways, and your brother. So
Yeah,
you assume that role.
in a lot of ways.
So
In a lot of ways, sure.
So how would you recommend to all of us who are not really familiar with dealing with people who are hearing impaired, what are just some basic tips that you might have? They weren't in the questions that I was going to ask you, I'm sorry, but they
That's
just sort
okay.
of occurred to me.
It's okay.
And you probably have it on the tip of your tongue. So could you just
Yeah,
enlighten
for
us?
sure. So, I think a big thing that I'll start with, I think you all know this, hearing disabilities is a very wide spectrum, much like many other disability categories. So, somebody who has a hearing disability may or may not know how to sign. Somebody with a hearing disability may or may not know how to read lips. Somebody with a hearing disability may or may not be fantastic at written English. All of these are spectrum-based, and it just depends. But I think maybe just some common concepts for the audience here, based on my experiences with a strong ASL-using, culturally deaf family, is that deaf people, and when I talk about deaf people, I always talk about it in the capital D sense. Deaf people are very proud of their language, and many times are very proud of their deafness. Being deaf to a culturally deaf person is their identity, much like you are Jewish or LGBTQ+, or whatever that identity you have is. Many of our culturally deaf folks, their identity is deafness, and with that is the proud association with that. So I would offer that having things available in ASL, if that is a possibility in your world, depending on where you are and what you do, that many times is a game changer for a culturally deaf person versus captioning, which we all know and love, but that isn't necessarily what a culturally deaf person would view as complete accessibility for them. So that's just one nugget. And just be aware of all the different types of services that exist out there. Some are required by law, have to have an assistive listening system, right, which provides amplified audio in a room or a theater-based setting. But some of those other services to provide, per the ADA, reasonable accommodation, things like providing things with sign language interpretation, things with captioning. All of those are easier and easier to do because of technology. You can do captioning, and I think you guys know this if you're an iPhone user. You have an app that's native to your iPhone now that's called Translate. And if you've ever messed around with it, it is really awesome how it can take your spoken word and put it into a whole host of either other languages spoken or written text. I mean, simple stuff. It's on your phone, right? So I think it's thinking about all those things and having a good strategy or a game plan to deliver to those guests who fall in the, quote, hearing disability space.
So are you familiar with the app Genie?
Yes?
You are, okay. So I was an angel investor in Genie. So this is an app that basically brings in an ASL interpreter through FaceTime. So it's basically a three-way conversation so that people can actually interpret. So they have an ASL interpreter on their phone. So are there any other apps or technologies that? So this is something that destinations and hotels and should be aware of, because they can actually just download that themselves. So
I think, something I'll mention, everybody has heard of VRS. If you don't know what VRS stands for, VRS is Video Relay Service. So this is probably the primary way a deaf person makes what we'll call phone call. So if a deaf person wants to call and order pizza, Domino's, deaf person wants to call and make a reservation at Walt Disney World, they are calling through a video relay service, which basically connects them from their device, their home TV, their smartphone, their iPad, whatever, connects them to an interpreter on their screen. And the interpreter acts as the go-between, the relay. So the deaf person signs to the interpreter places the call, speaks on behalf of the deaf person, and then provides back to the deaf person whatever the person on the other end is saying. So it's called VRS. There are several companies out there that are major providers of VRS. For you as businesses out there, there's really nothing you need to do special other than A, know that VRS exists, and B, have some process for if you have folks who are receiving inbound calls and it becomes clear that it is a VRS call. For example, it is a person speaking who identifies themselves as Mary, but the voice you hear is a male. It could be because that person has called through a relay service. So that Mary, who's deaf, is signing to Donald, who's the interpreter, and Donald is now speaking to you, right? So it's understanding and recognizing what that is. In the past, there were many deaf people who would have calls hung up, they'd be hung up on the other end because the person didn't understand what was happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's just talk a little bit about the culture at
sure.
Disney. So the scope of yours is really all the Disney properties here.
Yep.
And just talk a little bit about your idea of inclusiveness and how you started at You started at Disney when you were 18?
A little off and on. Yes, I can. I'll go into my full-time history. Yes.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about that, and then how you sort of grew into what you're doing now.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of you went to Epcot last night, by the way. You saw Harmonious, our new nighttime show. Pretty cool stuff, right? I think you all know this, by the way. Walt Disney World is the same size as San Francisco. Like, it's huge, right? So my team, we manage all accessibility services for the Walt Disney World site. We also provide support to other partners around the globe who are part of our company. I and my team, we are, if you will, the subject matter experts when it comes to accessibility. So we provide a lot of guidance and direction. I've been at Disney closing in on 25 years. To Jake's point, my role when it first was set up, I focused on creating inclusion and accessibility for those with hearing disabilities, setting up of our sign language program and other related services. And as time has passed over these 25 years, I've had the pleasure of taking on more and more scope and more responsibility. During my time, by the way, I also was on our internship program, which is called the college program. I worked at an attraction called the Great Movie Ride, which was at the Disney MGM Studios. I also had a year I spent at Disneyland Paris, not long after they opened. So I've had a good opportunity to do some things. I was in California for 7 of my almost 25 years with the company. So I've had a chance to see a lot of things in the company and really have been blessed to see the thoughtfulness and effort that we as a company have put into accessibility. We absolutely do not have it all figured out, but I feel like we're going in a good direction and we have good support and good partners who really want to do the right thing. Ron Pettit, he and I were chatting earlier this morning. You know, the big thing that we really focus on at Disney when it comes to accessibility is what should we do, not what must we do, right? Must is that compliance. What does the code book say we have to do? Well, it's a minimum thing. That's probably the wrong way to think about it. If you think about it more in a should mindset, what should I do for my customers, you're going to get yourself in a way better place because A, you're going to check the compliance box automatically, but B, you're going to be a destination of choice. If I know as a deaf person that your business provides sign language interpreters to me upon request versus the other guy that doesn't, I'm probably coming to you if I'm a deaf person who signs. So there is a competitive advantage to be thinking about accessibility across the board. And as I kind of touched on earlier, all of these disabilities we're talking about, you guys know this, it's a spectrum, right? There's hearing disabilities, that's a lot of things. There's visual disabilities, that's a lot of things. There's mobility disabilities, that's a lot of things, right?
And it's impossible to be accessible for everyone
It is
because
impossible.
of that reason.
We actually had that conversation this morning as well. Yes.
Yeah, so
be
just
careful saying we are an accessible destination, because that comes with, well, let me tell you that what I want as my disability, and you said this, and I want this, and you may not be able to do that, right? So yeah.
So let's talk. I want to ask you one question about the lexicon. Okay, so instead of saying we're accessible for everyone, what should they say? We welcome people with disabilities.
I think that is a much better.
Okay.
That's a much better, safer way to go. Absolutely.
And that's a good messaging system for people. Okay.
Yes.
So what percentage would you estimate in terms? And I'm sure that Disney does a lot of research and studies, so you probably have it down to the third decimal point. So in terms of breakdown by disability, what percentages? How would you break that down?
Well, we're usually real big about not getting into the metrics of the specifics, but I will say that, generally in a given year, we're hosting probably about 50 million guests with disabilities. That's a lot of people. That's just here at Walt Disney World. So
out of how many?
Out of whatever the U.S. population might be, right? You can extrapolate what that number
300
is.
million.
Yeah.
So just
it's a
sixth.
So it's a lot of people with disabilities. The most obvious that we hear or become aware of, obviously, are those with mobility disabilities, right? They're traveling with a device of some sort. Maybe they have a service animal. Maybe they have something else they're leveraging. So some of the others we're not obviously, contrary to popular belief, we all don't have that little chip inserted that allows the world to track us. So we don't really know the numbers, right, of people with disabilities that we receive. We're able to extrapolate a little bit. But a lot of folks with disabilities choose accessible places to go on vacation. And I feel like we're putting our best effort in trying to do just that as we open new things, as we refurbish old things, trying to make our facilities as accessible as possible. Again, I know we don't have it all figured out, but I feel like there's good momentum to always try to improve and do better. So it's a lot of people, Jake. At the end of the day, it's a lot of people with disabilities who come to see us, and we know about a pretty small number of them based on what we're observing, but we know it's a large number.
So there's no survey that's done? Or
Correct.
There's no,
Correct.
Okay, so
yes.
That's probably a privacy issue,
It is,
right? So
yes.
just
Well, except whenever they do activate the microchip, maybe that's how they're going to start tracking everybody. I don't know.
Just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, fair enough.
So what trends, so in closing here, the reason this is important and training is important is because, we're in the hospitality industry, and hotels train people all the time. Professional development is a big part of what they do because we're trying to welcome guests and make them feel comfortable. So what trends do you see in terms of accessibility, new things, new technology, new services that we should know about?
Well, in listening to some of the previous speakers this morning, I think we all can agree that tourism is back, right? Everybody's chomping at the bit to get out there and do a trip somewhere. So we are definitely reaping that. There are lots of folks wanting to come to see us. Our reservation system puts some limits around that for folks to be able to visit with us. But as far as trends in the accessibility industry, we're always looking to try to look to the next big thing. So right now, for example, we are looking to convert away from technology that relies on proprietary hardware and move that more into somebody always has their cell phone with them. So trying to figure out how we can provide that wide range of services through more of an app-based solution. It's easy, I think, if you run a single theater with one room. It's a little more complex when you're talking about 4 theme parks, 26 resort hotels, 2 entertainment districts, et cetera, et cetera. So trying to figure out a way to integrate all of our property through an app-based solution covering all of those different disability services that we have available. So that's kind of our next big effort, is to do that. And then as we open new things, new experiences, just ensuring that we are staying close to manufacturers out there who develop products, whether it's ride vehicles, whether it's other support infrastructure, making sure we're able to connect with them early and not late in the process, so we're not having to scramble at the 23rd hour to make a change to something that's already been built versus trying to get to it earlier when it's still just on a cocktail napkin as an idea, right?
Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to thank you for this, and I want to thank you for your service on our advisory board.
Of course.
You've helped us a lot in terms of understanding everything, and let's give Mark a big hand for just coming here and being
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.